官員入嚟啦，我哋夠時間夠人數。
Please invite the officials to join us now.
好，咁啊，歡迎政府代表。
I'd like to welcome the government team, and I will introduce them one by one. Members, please refer to a tabled paper, CP21838 1415, bracket 01, which was sent to members on the 30th of June. And the paper is the government's response to questions and comments raised on the 2nd of June, 2015. Point number one, the choice of the term purporting to and the corresponding Chinese term. The government would delete the term purporting to in an amendment. Second point, financial gain. Third point, defining the offense by territoriality. So altogether 3 points. So I would now give the floor to Ms. Chung to introduce this particular paper, and then we would resume our cross examination. Chairman, our response is a response to questions and comments raised on the 2nd of June, and the members have also proposed some amendments. So we have considered those in our response. On the question of drafting or law, purporting to is a common term. There are two major meanings. Well, we understand the concerns, the worries of members and the chairman. I think a middle ground to deal with this is to delete the words purporting to. We have considered the implication for enforcement and the effectiveness of the bill. Actually, for this new bill, what we want to achieve is to prohibit certain advertisements. We have to cover human reproductive technology as well as sex selection services. We believe that the proposed deletion will present only acceptable implications to enforcement. So if members are agreeable, the government will move this amendment. So that's point number one, and we are presenting this as a preliminary proposal to members. Second point, please, financial gain. If we include a financial gain element, then the enforcement threshold will be raised. We may have to gather information on whether there is commercial gain or financial gain during a certain period of time. it would have a big implication for law enforcement. So maybe I should repeat our assessment again. Well, the word knowingly is in the ordinance. And as our DOJ colleagues explained, there are a number of factors to be considered in law enforcement, the intent, and so on and so forth. And this particular provisions will not likely catch someone who is actually innocent. So we do not agree to have this particular element added in view of the enforcement difficulties. And there's another point raised by members on the territoriality. I think the idea is to have words like local or in Hong Kong or similar terms. Well, in terms of drafting, according to the Department of Justice, without saying anything, there is already an element of territoriality. There's no need to have an explicit mention of the application of the statute. And if we mention that this is about advertisement in Hong Kong only, then the courts may come to a different interpretation. A restrictive construction may be adopted that may undermine the effectiveness of the legislative proposal. Because the territorial element is already implicitly referred to in the provision, we do not think that it's necessary to amend it. And we are also concerned that if we were to do this, a long line of tradition in law drafting may be changed. Mr. Chan Chi-Chin, on the first point, the government will propose the deletion of purporting. I support it. Well, with the two words purporting to, it's easier for government to satisfy the evidential burden. Let's say this tea would enable you to have a baby. So it's an advertisement. If you have the word purporting to, you can prosecute it without proving whether it's really the case with the tea. Well, it's good that the government is willing to offer this concession. Although your evidential burden is higher, the government is always concerned that accepting our amendments, enforcement will be made more difficult. So it's difficult to argue anymore. Well, if the government doesn't want to do it, perhaps we should consider doing our own CSA. Secondly, another suggestion, in financial gain, the government will not accept it. Whenever you mention financial gain or financial benefits, it can always be in the form of a deferred payment. Even for corruption of government officials, it can also be deferred, or it can be done in a roundabout way. The bill will not be able to handle such benefits. And financial benefits or financial gain is not the only element involved here. For example, the person who distributes handouts and flyers, does he have a benefit? Or you share some links with other people. You are not in the business. And the person, in my view, should not be asked to shoulder the risk of committing an offense. If the government doesn't want to do it, I'll consider moving my CSA. With regard to the deletion of purporting to, I agree with the government's proposal, because we have said a number of times that this particular formulation will give excessive power to the government, and many people will be unnecessarily implicated, because purporting to is a term without clear legal definition, so we don't think it should be there. So I agree with the government's proposal to delete it, and I don't think members here would disagree with me. Turning to financial gain, Mr. Chen Chi-chin has referred to deferred benefit or deferred payment. If someone without any financial gain share information with others, and in case that there is no financial gain, will the act be covered as well? I remember the government said that in prosecution and in a case of sharing information on the internet or sharing certain hyperlinks, consideration will be given to whether the person has the intent to communicate or to do an advertisement. So why don't you incorporate an element of financial gain in the provision? Well, you are saying that it's already there in spirit, but why don't you do it explicitly? Mr. Lu, if I don't have any misunderstanding about the suggestion from you, Mr. Chairman, and you are saying that we are not going to target anything other than a commercial behavior. Why don't we set it out in the law? Well, under our legal system, we have to prove all the elements of the offense beyond reasonable doubt before the offense is substantiated. Of course, an advertisement is very often a commercial behavior. But if we include financial gain as an element in the offense, that means that the prosecution will have to prove beyond doubt that the defendant got a financial gain. Should we do that? As the Deputy Secretary has said, this will present real difficulties. But the bill will cover communication over the internet and things like hyperlinks. This is not the advertisement defined narrowly. That is the communication of ideas.
And for communication of ideas, if there is no financial gain, and I'm thinking this not being spelled out here in the future, if there is any sharing of internet messages, whether this will also fall under this and be caught by this and therefore be prosecuted. And further, a question concerning whether there had been, whether the financial gain as an element should be included into the legislation here. To answer the chairman's question, first of all, for sharing a hyperlink or forwarding a hyperlink for overseas cases, basically just to disseminate a hyperlink, does not constitute disseminating the content that is linked to the hyperlink. So the risk there is not that high. Secondly, as for the relevant stipulation, if the chairman is asking whether for Hong Kong legislation there had been any pertaining to advertising and using one of the elements as financial gain, then to that question, according to our research, we do not have such cases as far as our research goes. So there are none. So you're saying that for what is included in the actus rea or this legislation, financial gain is not one of the elements to be looked into for proving actus rea. Is that right? Well, Mr. Chairman, we have done some research in the legislation. For financial gains. A term usually is used for bribery and such actions, and there is no past cases of this relating to advertising. Our legal advisor. Mr. Chairman, for financial gains, if it is to limit it so that non-profit making actions would not fall foul of this law, I've seen other ways of dealing with it. For example, using exclusion clauses, for example, for smoking and cigarette selling, the forbidding internet selling of cigarettes. And then it goes on to say, if it is not for commercial purpose, then it would not fall foul of the law. So that is one way. And another way is in undesirable pharmaceuticals and medication. Now, if there are certain advertisements in the journals, if the journal is of a medical nature, then it also constitutes an exclusion or exemption. So these are two possibilities, two routes. Well, that's exactly, thank you, our legal advisor. That is exactly our concern. And that is for exemptions or exclusions for the Hong Kong law. This is already there. And that is for exemption for internet sharing or linkage, hyperlinks sharing, and also for scientific or professional journals. That is another exclusion. Now, these are important for our consideration. Now, we have heard from depositions that we have held earlier, some specialists, medical specialists in this area have also, that is in human reproductive technology, have already said that the legislation or the existing laws are not clear, and they've gone to the authorities which have been reluctant to give them guidance. Now, if we have this bill passed, would all scientific thesis and specialist, that is medical specialist in the fields, journals would also be prosecuted under this law. And this would not be beneficial. Well, actually it would create a huge hindrance to the furtherance of human reproductive technologies development in Hong Kong. So I would like to know from the administration, for these two types of exclusions, that is, as we have seen, for the anti-smoking legislation and the undesirable medical advertisements, if we include these or this kind of application in the Human Reproductive Technology Amendment Bill, that would be good. I think these are added in view of the new media that we have today for anti-smoking. It was drafted in 2004-05. And so this is another major area, internet technology. So I do not know whether you all see that this is an opportunity for us to put this into this particular bill. Mr. Look. Mr. Chair, concerning the medical side and the chairman's concern, we have actually discussed this point. If I can just remind everyone, this act in itself, this act in itself will include two parts, and that is the actus rea and the mens res. If the service is not provided, then it purportedly provided, then it would not fall foul of the law. That is, the intention will also have to be proven. Well, for the colleagues' information, we are referring to the June 30th response from the administration. You can go to the 3 points therein. First of all, the government is willing to move a CSA to take out the purporting to wording in the bill. And secondly, we are presently dealing with the inclusion of financial gain as an element in the offense. And thirdly, the point is on territoriality, defining the offense by this. Now, we were talking about advertising and wording in advertising, and this is in keeping with the proposed amendments that we have on hand. Now, in terms of balance, I find it strange. Why is it not balanced, from the previous meeting? Well, Mr. Chair, from the previous meeting, we discussed the possibility of including financial gain as an element in the offense. And there was no discussion in the last meeting. Well, actually, I think we have talked about exclusions. In the past, we have excluded persons such as the person putting the typesetters in the journals, or as Mr. Chan mentioned just now, people who are handing out handbills for the advertisement. So these are employees to carry out these activities, and those people should be exempted. Now, as for financial gain, even though it is not expressly spelled out that they are excluded, but on the other hand, if these are employees, for example, on the internet platform, or such employees who are in the midst of these acts, or involved in these acts, then these persons who are innocently included or innocently liable to prosecution, then there should be protection afforded to them. Now, these have already appeared. This kind of treatment had already appeared in Hong Kong law. Is the DOJ of the opinion that this is not the time to address this point in this bill? If so, then perhaps at the next meeting we can come back to discuss these points in further detail. Mr. Chung. Mr. Chair, we understand the member's concern. The concern that certain innocent persons, quote unquote, are caught. In the past 2 meetings, we have already tried to explain our stance, and we have responded to certain questions in written form as well. But basically, the main point of concern is that for this kind of exclusion provisions, it may create a loophole. The relevant service providers, for example, or companies, if they purposely use this loophole, let's say by using email. Email may seem to be one-to-one, but on the other hand, you cannot see the distribution list, which may be huge. So this is another element that we want to look into, and we have explained this in the past meetings. As for medical journals, academic activities, in the past, we have tried to use some major guidelines in terms of prosecution and also law enforcement, and that is to use the intention so that this is to lower members' concerns, to see how this is not so easy in having innocent people fall foul of the law. Now, and there's another point. I do not know whether it will also allay your concerns, and that is we have already proposed taking off purporting to the wording there. I do not know whether after such amendment your concerns will be partially resolved. For these amendments and proposals, I think these are major concerns for our colleagues at DOJ. So preliminarily, if I can just make the following response, as for email sending, we are very concerned because this may create a very big loophole for such companies concerned to try to evade us. As for the medical part, perhaps we can go back and think about it some more. It seems to us that the present drafting of the stipulation would not easily make these medical or specialist personnel falling foul of the law. But on the other hand, if at depositions the medical field had spoken on this, then perhaps we can go back and think some more about medical journals, etc., whether we can indeed have some minor amendments so as to accommodate this, and also at the same time not create a loophole. Of course, we do not want to see there to be a loophole built in. And as for internet, personal email, etc., as mentioned, we are concerned about that. Yes, members. Ms. Sit-Ho, then Chen Chi-chen. There are three main areas mentioned in this document. Purporting to is to be deleted, and that is very, very good because your original text is sufficient. If you see the advertisement, then you prosecute the person concerned. You don't need purporting to. As for territoriality, I accept the government's stance because there are certain laws or the majority of legislation is silent on this. And if you put this in, it may not be good. Now, as for financial gains, I know members may be concerned that for the scenarios that we have come up with, for example, for exclusion of medical research, that I think is a must, because in dealing with other legislation such as Article 23 and anti-terrorism, this is a point of concern, grave concern for us, because if this is not for business purpose, not for commercial gains, but just for medical research, then this will be overly restrictive.
So if I want to publish an article in an academic journal, I won't mention that you can go to a certain address on Nathan Road to do this or that. So I think we should have a explicit exclusion for academic research. This is to protect the freedom of academic research. Another point is why there's something to that effect in the anti-smoking legislation, but not here. Well, I can accept the point of the government concerning financial gain, because financial gain can take many forms. If this is mentioned, then you would not be able to regulate the publication of advertisements through exchange of benefits. So why is it that you are so strict in the anti-smoking legislation, but not here? It's just like the point on territoriality. If we want to be consistent in our laws, and for major principles, which they should all be reflected in our laws, so why is it that you go for such minute detail in the anti-smoking legislation, but you don't want to do it for this bill? Mr. Look, I've kept 371 with me now. It's very difficult to trace the legislative intent back then because we were not involved personally, but you look at the provisions. The offense is widely drafted. It means that no one can put up an advertisement on the internet. No one. It's so wide, and therefore it's understandable to have exclusions in the statute as well. You look at the new offense that we're going to create. We need a mental element, mens rea. It must be done knowingly. There are already quite a lot to prove in order to support an offense in the bill. In the anti-smoking law, it's not just about any advertisement. It's a specific type of advertisement. Advertisement for cigarette and tobacco, and that's why there was the exclusion in the ordinance. I don't know whether I'm helping the DOJ or not by raising this. Well, the financial gain was mentioned in that anti-smoking ordinance was perhaps that they were sponsors of different sports events. So one cannot imagine that a service provider of a human reproductive technology would sponsor the Rugby 7, for example. We agree that we don't need to put that in this bill, but laws should be consistent. And just one more thing concerning emails. We have many spam mails.
可以避過咗 spam mail 呢啲，咁其實佢都做到，即係漁翁撒網咁做到。
So they can just send out spam emails indiscriminately, and that's tantamount to advertisement. Yes, if you send out advertisement emails on a large scale, and if we have this exclusion, that would make it difficult. Every mail itself is a private communication. But in effect, the distribution list contains thousands of email accounts. So that would create a problem. when the other ordinance was enacted, maybe internet was not so widely used. And now there are many more ways or means to evade law enforcement. So preliminarily, this might seem like a reason. As Mr. Lok has said, when we look at the record, Cap 371 was added to our statute book in 1997. We'll try to see if we can find some records on the legislative intent and whether there were special considerations raised in LegCo. But instantly coming to my mind is that in 1997, the internet usage was different. And I've also received an email which appears to be one-to-one. Well, I have to check it before reverting to members. Well, 1997 is a problematic year. We have the provisional LegCo. So please tell us whether it's before or after the 30th of June 1997. Well, everyone was in a rush. There were many bills to consider, and there were private members' bills, protection of the harbor, and Mr. Lee Cheuk-yan's collective bargaining bill. And they said that they would do the provisional LegCo will only do the minimum. So now we have somehow given part of the legislative power to CE. So it's a problematic year. Before the 30th of June that year, people were in a great rush. And after the 30th of June, we had a bunch of people who had never been LegCo members, and they only served for 8 months to a year. They hardly knew what legislative work meant. So please find the records by all means, but don't regard the practice as the tradition. Maybe you should reconsider why the wording was so restrictive back then. And you have to consider that we are in a different time, and whether the current drafting is appropriate. Mr. Chen Ji-chin, I want to ask some follow-up questions concerning emails. If you send out hundreds of thousands of emails, I don't think this will apply in the human reproductive technology field. I won't buy email accounts for mass distribution. I will buy names and accounts from clinics so that I can be more focused. If a person consults a doctor, can you make sure that I have a baby boy? The doctor will say that this is not allowed in Hong Kong. I'll give you an email address in the U.S. It's just the provision of information. But if the doctor forward a promotional email message to this same person, this patient of his, would that come under advertisement in this bill? And also in one-to-one email correspondence, for example, when I ask for fees, and then I believe I will not be caught under this bill. But if I give the email account, my email address to this U.S. company saying that they feel free to contact me or send me new information. And this foreign company would of course send me information in respect of the matters that I'm interested in. So my question is, will such acts be regulated or caught? My understanding is limited. If a doctor refers a patient to another, say another specialist, he will write a referral letter. Well, it's not allowed in Hong Kong. No referral can be made. According to Mr. Chan, the doctor may send or share a link with the patient. It's not a referral letter. The subject matter is just an email address. Or it can be an email, a promotional email, which he refers to the patient, yes, by the doctor. So because no service is allowed in Hong Kong, what the doctor can do is to refer the patient to an overseas provider. If you look at this bill, a cost to be published or distributed or knowingly publish or distribute an advertisement to promote sex selection services. If the doctor refers a link or tells the patient a link, well, it's just like giving a flyer, a handbill to the patient.
轉介呢個問題咧，我諗我哋要翻去最基本咧，就喺條例之下咧，如果係因為非
Well, if I may, well, if sex selection services are offered for non-medical reasons, is illegal. If the doctor knows that the patient has no medical reason for that, under Cap 561. Well, there are a number of reasons set out in the schedule. That is a list of hereditary diseases, which would be the basis for screening of gender. Well, if the patient wants to have a baby boy and the doctor says you can go to this or that service provider, that doctor is already in violation of the code for medical practitioners. I don't know whether you're talking about medical council codes. There's no restriction on the provision of information to the patient because it's the patient's right to know. If we are not allowed to do anything under the laws of Hong Kong, but in the medical practitioners registration ordinance, there's nothing saying that we are not allowed to give information to a patient, including information of overseas practitioners. Let's say I'm a specialist in human reproductive technology, and the patient is so worried that the family is going to be broken up because the wife has had 7 daughters and the husband insisted on having a boy.
But if you're very desperate to have a boy, then I would know that this doctor in the U.S., in the state of Washington, say, then he is very good in this area. Well, I see, let's say the medical practitioner sees that a family is about to break up and therefore provide this information not because of financial gains. And there are instances where certain drugs are not available in Hong Kong but overseas. You know that our Hong Kong health and medical service is terrible. They very often do not import drugs or medication, which is absolutely useful. Let's say there is a medical doctor which says, now this drug is not sold in Hong Kong, not provided by the Hong Kong not registered with the Department of Health, but on the other hand, this drug is available in, let's say, Chicago, and this patient is to buy the relevant drug which will save his life from Chicago. Now, if even by so doing, that is a medical doctor providing that information of this drug with the intention of helping the patient, if even he is liable just by providing that information for the medication, which will save the patient's life, makes him liable, then we really will need another session to examine that law. Now, because for the medical practitioner, if you have that information and you do not provide the information to the patient, that is problematic. But on the other hand, very often we are forced to provide information concerning medication and service to the patient, which is not available in Hong Kong. Gene therapy, for example, in Hong Kong was not available in Hong Kong, and this Hong Kong sanatorium doctor put it down that they referred a patient to the U.S. for the genetic procedures, and it became a case. I did not want to raise this actually, but I can tell you that this kind of scenario is really not acceptable. What you have proposed is not acceptable in light of the cases that we've talked about. In para 28, we have also made this clear, and that is for providing information to the patient by Hong Kong medical practitioners, that itself should not be construed as falling foul of the law. As for Mr. Chan's scenario described just now, I think we have to go to the DOJ colleagues to ask them, under what circumstances and scenarios would make the doctor-patient relationship whereby, because of the medical necessity on the part of the patient, the doctor had to provide information to this patient. For the doctor providing information to the patient under certain scenarios where the doctor is really assisting a company or promoting for a company, then that is a different scenario. But on the other hand, where a specialist doctor providing information to the patient had somehow conflicted with this law without any promotion intentions. So we will really have to clarify that with the DOJ, what kind of scenarios would be covered or not covered under this legislation. Give me a bit of time, if you will. I will specifically go back to the DOJ on this specific point. But generally, in response to the chairman's question, in principle, the medical doctor's behavior or action should not be problematic with regard to this law. We do not want to see where there is unnecessary problems caused to the medical practitioners. Well, according to my understanding, this legislation as it stands now should not cover the kind of scenario that the chairman described. Mr. Chair, very often information and advertising are very difficult to tell apart. Your scenario just now was the patient asking the doctor for information and medical service that is not provided in Hong Kong. But on the other hand, if the doctor says there are certain links, etc., then you can go do your research, because if you ask me for reproductive technology or genetic or rather sex selection, then I do not provide this service here in this clinic. Now, for the latter, would the doctor fall foul of the law? Is that disseminating information or not? The second scenario, if you please. Now, if I voluntarily provide my email address to a U.S. company and regularly the company would provide such a promotional email to me, is this also illegal in view of the bill as it stands? And will you take action? Mr. Chair, for Mr. Chan's question, that's exactly the crux of the issue. This law basically is focused on advertising. If the information disseminated is not advertising in itself, but just for information, then it will not come into the ambit of this law. And the advertisement will have to be selling something or be seen by the reasonable man as selling something, a product, that is. So there is sufficient protection and safeguards in the bill itself already. The second scenario Mr. Chan raised, the patients voluntarily providing email or correspondence channel to the companies concerned. And the companies provide information concerning sex selection. The question was, would this fall foul of the law? Well, superficially, when we look at the bill for advertising, whether it is advertising or publicity aimed to the public or part of the public or a small group of people, if the information therein is promotion for sex selection, then I cannot see why these advertisements would not fall into the ambit of the law. Mr. Look, if I may clarify, Mr. Chan was saying just now that if the email disseminated to this person, to this patient, is promotional, then you're saying that this would fall into the law. Yes, indeed, Mr. Chair. So the company providing such email would fall foul of this law. Is that right? Well, yes. It depends on whether the wording is in full fitting with the prescriptions of the law, and also the mens rea test will also be satisfied. Well, if that is the case, and really have to go back and think some more about it, I was of the opinion and understanding that for this bill, it is really targeted against what is more and more rampant advertising in the media. But if you say that the internet is also to be included, then I have a problem, or this panel will have a problem with it, and that is for email, which or private email, which is not advertising in itself, then that may be problematic. For 1997 amendment and also the undesirable drugs, undesirable medical advertisements. In light of that, I have problems with this, and that is even for private email, it would still be caught by the law, and I have a problem with that. Now, if you look at the document that you have provided to have a restrictive inclusion, then there would have to be a financial benefit concerned as well. And this is to avoid having innocent people being caught. Now, for undesirable medical advertisement and anti-smoking legislation, there are very clear exclusion methods. And those methods are for our consideration. But if you look at this bill, for example, if a concert is sponsored or a sports event is sponsored, but it is purely for advertising and promotional purpose, then first of all, this will be very rare. If you're saying that instead of advertising in journals and magazines, then that is that advertising. Because information provision and advertising are two different things. We must tell them apart. For other jurisdictions, you have to understand, they would not consider providing information on HRT to be problematic. For some other jurisdictions, actually advertising on gender selection or sex selection may not be illegal. And Hong Kong is a place with free flow of information. Yes, the act cannot be carried out in Hong Kong. Advertising cannot be carried out in Hong Kong. But if you are disallowing even email links and hyperlinks, then that is highly dubious. It's not that I do not support the law, but going back to the first meeting, I said that we are not in support of the law, but we are worried that if the bill is to be passed, then in the future, for advertising and principles of disallowing advertising may be chipped, and this may be a Trojan horse for future consideration on free flow of information. And the more I ask, the more fearful I become, because if you say any information circulation is caught by this law, then I have grave reservations. I cannot accept something that is so wide-ranging, with no exclusions and with no criminal elements involved, and to have those acts included as well. I know Mr. Chan will propose a CSA and other members as well, and therefore we cannot conclude the discussion here. And I've also heard Mr. Chung and Mr. Look saying that concerning these two parts, and that is for the two methods for exclusion for anti-smoking legislation and undesirable medical advertisement, you will consider those methodologies. And also on Mr. Chan's point concerning information. And the overseas or these other companies have provided information and information only on the selection. And if that falls out of the law, then I have grave reservations. Mr. Chair, I have a question about hyperlinks. Now, before I move the CSA, if I have a draft here, if I can just send this around. I have 9 copies here. I don't know whether that's sufficient. But while we're distributing the draft, if I can just ask a question on sharing of hyperlink. This is clearly not illegal, because in recent years, hyperlink technology has been enhanced. If you just share a hyperlink, perhaps the entire diagram will appear on your screen. And if you share a hyperlink, there is a preview which will appear on your website. Now, if it is a 30-second clip, and if you share the hyperlink, just by sharing the hyperlink, the entire video can be shown on your Facebook. And I've asked this of the Copyright Office, and they say because we cannot control the what's behind of the hyperlink. So just by sharing the hyperlink, causing the entire diagram to appear on the website or the entire video to appear on the website. This would not construe falling foul of the copyright law. But in our previous meeting at this panel, if we said if hyperlink is but a series of computer signs, that is symbols, X, hashtag, etc.
So it's not advertisement. If I can have the poster display in my Facebook just by sharing the hyperlink, or it can be an advertisement clip under YouTube. I can preview it in my Facebook account. So objectively speaking, by sharing the hyperlink in my Facebook account, I'll be sharing the entire clip or advertisement with other people. I want to refer to the response of the administration to hyperlinks. Canadian Supreme Court is of the view that sharing of hyperlinks should not be regarded as a communication of the relevant message. Only if the contents are also disseminated will the person sharing hyperlinks with other people be responsible for the communication of the contents. Let's say I share the hyperlink and I'm saying, and also write something saying that it's effective, it's a 99% success rate, and so on and so forth. But it's not an infringement of copyright. But in sharing the hyperlinks, my additional comments are included. Only if the one who shares the hyperlinks also expresses the contents of the relevant email address, emails would that count. In that case, the defendant communicate to others 8 hyperlinks of 8 indecent pictures. The defendant understands, the defendant pleaded guilty, but it's in a magistrate's court's case, so it's not a precedent. We had a discussion in the context of the copyright ordinance. If I have a website and I have a dozen of hyperlinks listed there concerning the latest drama series aired in the U.S., I could have committed some offense. If I ask people to sign up as members, to pay up as members to allow quicker download. So whether it's an infringement of copyright is a separate issue under the copyright ordinance. And I've tried to draft 2 amendments. I don't make them up. I was referring to Section 28A in the Copyright Ordinance, infringing of copyright by the dissemination to the public. I copy almost word per word from that provision. They use communication, but here we use publish. If the contents are not decided by the person who sends out the hyperlink, it's not communication by him. Because of what's behind the hyperlink can be changed by the one who publish it.
跟住下邊嗰條呢，就係任何人不會因為下述目的採取一個或多於一個步驟。
And if someone takes one or more steps to decide the contents, for example, receipt of the electronic messages, so on and so forth. Maybe we should not discuss my amendments today. I haven't really actually prepared my CSA. Because the sharing of a hyperlink is clearly dealt with in the copyright ordinance. So I'm referring to 28A, point number 5 and number 6. Well, there are different ordinances, but the degree of strictness can be different. So maybe in the future, when you want to talk about treason by sharing hyperlinks, you may wish to refer to different ordinances, and you may wish to refer to the ordinances with stricter requirements. Well, of course, it's better that you move the CSA than the CSAs that I'm going to move. The original intent is not commensurate with the exclusions or exemptions provided, or a lack of exemptions protected, because the spirit is quite different than those you find in the copyright ordinance as far as the sharing of hyperlinks is concerned. I think this council should act very strictly in assessing internet-related matters such as sharing of hyperlinks. Well, if we allow this to go forward, then the government may invoke this as a model. That would be unacceptable. I hope the government would understand our worries and provide sufficient exclusion exemptions. You should introduce more provisions to implement your policy in legislative intent. I don't think you want to regulate internet communication. The fact is you cannot regulate internet communication. And this is only attempted in some other jurisdictions. I don't want to veto the entire bill because you do not want to provide the necessary exclusions. I've also considered whether distributing the handbills will be covered by my exclusion. We haven't gone to that level of detail. Distribution of handbills, and that is people who are participating in the process. The typesetter, for example, and the internet webmaster who is an employee. There's no direct financial benefit, and the government is not willing to provide the exclusion, the exemption, because the advertisement is published in the handbill, so the one distributing the handbills will be caught. I hope the government will address the side effects of the bill. And I also covered the posting of links in social media sites. And also you can search what you want to find through Google. and the technology is that you can search by way of a picture or by way of a link. So you don't need to access the original site to look at the advertisement. Are you going to provide some safe harbor? Would I be liable if I download the information from this search results? Well, there are safe harbors in the copyright ordinance. But I think the line of thinking is similar. One is talking about copyright. This one is about advertisement. But there are two possible options to deal with internet information. One, you can copy and paste some provisions from the copyright ordinance. Or secondly, Mr. Look, perhaps you can say something about this. Can we be referred back to existing ordinances concerning the applicability of copyright protection so that we can better define the scope of the bill? I think we are talking about the same thing. We are seeing more and more advertisements for sex selection services. You know, the tobacco companies are very aggressive advertisers, and they do not resort to internet advertisements. They can do it through other means. So they do not make use of this loophole. So why is the government still so very much concerned? Mr. Look, any supplement? If not, Mr. Chung, if you don't have anything to add, maybe we should find another slot to continue with the discussion. Well, Google is an automatic search engine. The user inputs some keywords for the search, and these search results are generated through an automatic process in the computer. There isn't any mens res element to support an offense. But they can ask for payments. The search engine company can ask for payments. But it is not publication by Google. Google is an automatic process. So they dare not touch Google. But if you do that, they're not likely to spare you. Dr. So, I want to say something about undesirable medical advertisements. Your legal advisor has suggested that we provide some exclusions. Under Section 5, there are defenses. Let me explain. In any process involving 3(3)(b), if the advertisement in question is carried in the technical publications, including A, B, C, D, for example, professional, medical publications, and so on, then defense is available. Well, we will consider the suggestions along this line, whether we should provide similar exemptions. And I can also mention the number of prosecutions under the Undesirable Medical Advertisements Ordinance. Actually, it's in the supplementary information. Starting from 2011 to the 30th of April 2015, 31 advertisements were the subjects of prosecutions, 8 publishers, and 10 practitioners, and 11 and 6 retailers were prosecuted. So all these are the relevant persons in charge of the organizations concerned, and they are not employees. So you prosecute people who obviously has a motive and who are doing this for gain, then it's okay. But we are concerned about people who have no gain, and also we want to make sure that there is no unnecessary obstacle to the free flow of information. Well, sex selection is information. If you don't allow them to have advertisement, it doesn't mean that the information is not available globally. And you say that whenever you see an advertisement, you want to prosecute someone, it's going to be a big problem. And if you say, we have one country, 2 systems, you cannot touch such subjects under the national security law or under the future Article 23 legislation, then anything of that nature would spark off a very negative response. Legal advisor? I have a question for the government. In the overall response, it said that banning such advertisement will not restrict people's right to the information. So when all these advertisements are banned, what channels will be available for these people to gain access to the relevant information? Let me talk about the approach we adopted in preparing this bill. We look at this as a matter related to information, and in particular, this is about sex selection and the use of advanced human reproductive technology. If we look at the need of the patient, we are talking about medical needs of the patient. We believe the ideal position is that the information should come from professional medical practitioners. So that's why we want to ban advertisement comprehensively. That is to say, we don't make a distinction between the medical needs and non-medical needs. Of course, in the drafting, we were also concerned that there might be people sharing information on communicating information through private correspondence. In the first round of consultation, some professional people and individuals reminded us that many people had used the internet for disseminating the information. So if we did not mention that we had considered internet, we would be criticized for a serious omission. Turning to Cap 371, and that is the so-called non-private nature, and also the medical journal exclusion. Well, we would consider those. We need to balance the merit of doing this and the implication for enforcement. Turning to Mr. Chan's amendments, let's regard these as a preliminary draft. Well, it's just his opinion. I have to seek advice from the DOJ. Chairman, I will welcome the opinion offered by Mr. Chan, and I would like to also relate other members' opinion to the government. And I think Mr. Chung is inclined to provide some CSAs to help us out. Well, the wording is from the copyright ordinance. Since the wording is used in another piece of legislation to deal with information disseminated through the internet, I believe the government should adopt it, and you should move the CSA so that we are spared of the need to pass the split voting system. You know, whatever we propose is going to be objected to. Well, thank you for your response of the 30th of June. We are particularly concerned about the internet.
And also internet information. I very much agree that, as I've mentioned just now, there are 2 points. First of all, you should consider the exclusions adopted by other legislation and consider using them here. That is very appropriate. And secondly, for other legislation such as undesirable medical advertising, anti-smoking legislation, refer to those and allay the fears. If we want to do a good job of this, we first of all do not want to lower the efficacy of the laws. I hear that you are not trying to combat internet usage, is that right? Or advertising on the internet? I mean, how much can internet advertising net at the end of the day? Any other things, members, if there are none, and if there are any concerning CSA or preliminary drafts on those, please do raise them. And further, the government will go back to refer to the anti-smoking legislation, undesirable medical advertising, and internet information, as well as copyright law, and come back to us. Mr. Chair, would the administration provide us with the information, or would our secretariat or the legal advisor provide us with the 2 relevant legislation mentioned just now? Well, yes. I think we do not wait for the administration, but rather rely on our own legal assistant as advice as well as the secretariat. What is the timing, Mr. Chairman? Well, I would like to put this to the members, but I do not believe that this will be passed within this legislative year. Before the summer. I do not know how much the administration thinks that this is to be passed in urgency. I do not think there is any urgency. So 22nd July 2:30 would be the next meeting. This being the 6th of July, would the administration need more time? We need more time, Mr. Chair. That's fine. In that case, shall we say September then? September, yes. The next meeting. Mr. Chair, well, we can have a meeting on the 27th. No, the administration cannot answer all these points within that short period of time. Even if you have a meeting, we'll need another. Mr. Chair, I hope that by October we'll be able to go to the next stage, because at the end of the legislative year, we will be in a rush again. We don't want it to lapse. Well, first instance in September until October, we still have some time. Hopefully, within a week or 2 after that meeting in September, we can have another one. The Secretariat, would you know when we will have a meeting in October? When is the meeting in October? There is to be one. The second Wednesday of October. That's usually the slot. Yes, that is the usual arrangement. Other members? None? All right. We end the meeting here, and the Secretariat and us, we will be waiting for the administration's response. When is the next meeting again? Anybody will have to travel mid-September? Yes, education, going to Germany and Switzerland. By the 20th, they should have all returned to Hong Kong? Well, let us not clash with the overseas visit of members. Thank you very much.